welcome back, and I've been looking forward to our special guest today, Stephen Bonta. He is the executive senior editor there at the New American Magazine. He holds a PhD in linguistics from Cornell University, taught both at Cornell and Penn State, and has lived and worked in several countries, including Argentina, India, Sri Lanka, and China. And you can go to newamerican.com is the website, and there's a picture of that landing page, newamerican.com. Dr. Bonta, good to see you. How are you, friend?
Hey, great to be with you.
Thanks,
how are you?
Thanks for your time. Thanks for your time. Hey, quite the I guess you could say shake up in New York with the primaries. What's your thinking? What's your take?
Well, I mean, I'm not too surprised at the result. Three candidates in the primaries, that are endorsed by Mamdani moving on to the elections, and presumably they'll win their respective elections as well. But this is more like the logical outcome of what New York has been trending towards for literally generations than a radical departure from the past. I think in my lifetime, they've only had one Republican mayor, and that's Giuliani, that I can remember. And for me, maybe the more alarming concern is not New York per se, but the fact that the doctrine of socialism has become a national obsession. I mean, there was a Gallup poll that was taken among Democrats in 2010, and then again, I think in this year, and they compared It's basically had Democrats rate favorable, unfavorable, capitalism and socialism. And it was about 50-50 split back in 2010, and now socialism is like 62%, and capitalism is a much lower figure. So, clearly socialism is the flavor of the day for the Democrats. This is alarming, but in a way, I kind of look at it that they're finally calling their policies what they are. I mean, they've actually been socialistic since at least the New Deal. But in those days, socialism, the term was still kind of poisonous, kind of toxic, so they didn't call themselves socialists at the time. Now they're simply embracing who they truly are. That's how I see it anyway.
All right, so they're gaining, and they've identified themselves as socialists. Okay, and I think you make a good point. That's how they've been governing all along. But here's the question. Do you think the average American understands what socialism really is?
Well, no, and certainly most average American socialists don't understand what socialism really is. They think socialism is what they have in Denmark and Sweden, and if you say to them, well, but look at the hundreds of millions of lives that were lost to various socialist experiments in the 20th century, in Nazi Germany, which was socialist. Let's forget the Z part of Nazis is short for socialism, National Socialism, and of course, obviously Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, and so forth. And they'll always say, yes, but that wasn't really socialism. Or if they prefer to call it Marxism, they say, well, that wasn't true Marxism. They're doubling down on Marx as well. They're saying Marx was a great man, and the whole problem with Marxism is that his ideas were taken out of context and abused, and so forth, and so forth. And of course, they always resort to whataboutism. They'll say, but look at all the evils of imperialism and capitalism and all this. And so it's very difficult to win an argument with them because they have a strong emotional attachment, particularly young people who haven't had much life experience, whose entire experience in life has been socialistic, meaning they've lived at home, someone else has provided for them. And so naturally, when they move on into college and so forth, where that continues to an extent, they're apt to see that as the ideal way that human affairs should be ordered. So that's where we are.
So what can the Democrats point to as successful socialism?
Well, again, as I say, they always invoke the Scandinavian examples. But if you look carefully at the likes of Sweden, Sweden was actually very socialist for a long time, but they gave that up. At a certain point, I believe by the 1970s, they had near 100% income tax rates on their wealthiest people. And this was opposed by the likes of the lady who wrote the Astrid Lindgren, I think she was, the famous author that wrote the children's books on Pippi Longstocking. She kind of was one of the leaders against it. We can't do this. You're basically you can't be rich in Sweden anymore. So Sweden kind of moved away from that. Denmark and Norway are less, and other Western European countries are strongly dirigist in terms of their economic policies, but not really socialistic in the same way that the former Eastern Bloc countries were, or that China still is, or many other countries in the so-called Third World, including countries where I've lived, like Sri Lanka, whose official name is the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka. These countries do practice strong central command economies, and the results are predictable: poverty, misery, and corruption. But all of these inconvenient facts are glozed over by the American left, who continue to insist that if you just put the right configuration of brainy people in charge, meaning themselves, socialism will work. Because after all, at heart, we're all altruistic. We're not selfish and self-seeking as heartless monsters like Ayn Rand and Milton Friedman would have us believe. We, in fact, are just very close to achieving this kind of temporal paradise, earthly paradise, if only you allow us enough latitude to change human nature by force if necessary. But hey, you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. So, that's how the argument goes.
Why is religion an enemy of socialism?
Well, this is an interesting question. If you look at the history of socialism, it was not always so. In the early days of socialism, there were people, Saint-Simon in particular, who believed that socialism was kind of the political realization of the Christian ideal. And he claimed that some of those early communes in the 19th century claimed to be Christian and to be carrying out God's will. However, what happened during the course of the 19th century was that the atheist wing of socialism, led, of course, by Marx himself and the communists, won the ideological battle. And so there's also an interesting association linkage between early socialism and certain key occult figures like Aleister Crowley, Eliphas Levi, and so forth. Eliphas Levi was a very prominent Saint Simonite socialist early in his career before he decided to become a wizard, in effect. And that does continue. There is still, among international socialists, there is a strong interest in New Age type religion, things like this. You see that in evidence in the United Nations and so forth. The one type of religion that modern socialists cannot abide, of course, is Christianity, because ultimately it's understood that, and socialism, many forms of socialism from the very beginning were not just economic movements, they were also social movements. The early socialists did things like they tried to abolish the family and practice communal love and all this stuff. So, the modern left's love affair with LGBTQ and all this stuff is not a modern aberration. It has been part of the socialist movement all along, and this is something that people fail to understand. So in that sense, socialism also encompasses moral and ethical norms. It's, of course, trying to radically change those. So obviously it views Christianity as a very strong competitor in that regard.
Well, with all due respect, that if left unchecked, it wipes out conscience.
Oh, sure. That's obviously, it goes without saying. I'm trying to present this kind of in an academic way.
Yeah.
But obviously, if you ask yourself the right and wrong of it, socialism is contrary not only to human nature, it's also contrary to God's plan. It runs counter to everything, every fiber of Western Christian civilization. It's really very much an anti-Christian movement at core. And, starting with egalitarianism and collectivism, the notion that we all should be forced to be radically equal, it runs counter to our God-given human nature. We're not equal in any sense other than the sense of being equal under the law. And that, of course, is the type of equality that socialists don't care for. But they do like equality of outcome and equality of opportunity. And the twin reality of those are that we're never going to have those things in this world, nor are we meant to. We have a diversity of talents, of circumstances, and it's that kind of diversity, actually, that accounts for the richness of culture and human experience and all this kind of thing. And socialism, with what used to be called the leveling impulse, is an attempt to do away with those things by people who are profoundly, viscerally dissatisfied with life and the world and humanity, and just see everything as ridden with fault and ill, and that only they possess the moral purity to be able to correct.
Wow. So, Dr. Bonta, there's been plenty of research that is suggesting that young people are seeing the falsehood of it. I've had Dr. George Barna on quite a bit. We talk about this, and there seems to be a genuine move of young men investigating faith as a means of that they've been lied to, the culture's been lied to. Socialism is just a big candy bar that sooner or later you have to pay for 50 times over. Do you sense that?
Well, I think there's kind of a bifurcation going on. You do have, on the one hand, conservatism, so styled, has captured, I think, thanks to the exertions of people like Charlie Kirk and before him, a generation ago, Ron Paul and other people like this, have made it cool in some sectors to be anti-socialist, to be pro-free market, to be pro-individual liberty, and all this sort of thing. So it's not universally true that young people are, as Rush Limbaugh used to put it, skulls full of mush, in effect. But it is also substantially true that those who are inclined to be militant leftists are becoming more militant and more leftist and more prone to violence than at any time since, in my lifetime, since the 1960s, probably. I mean, there have been a couple of upheavals of extreme leftist radicalism in the United States. The first one was at the very beginning of the 20th century, with a spate of anarchist, terrorist attacks and so forth that just convulsed the country from about 1900 to about the early 1920s. And then again in the 1960s and 1970s. And now we seem to be entering another cycle of extreme leftist violence. And where that leads is hard to say, but if past is prelude, these things flare up. And then after a while, most of the perpetrators are either caught or killed, or they age out of their radicalism, as happened with many of the 60s radicals. And the country retains to some semblance of sobriety. But, we'll see. I don't want to downplay the direness of our situation right now. There's always been a danger that America will become a full-fledged socialist country. And in many ways, we have adopted socialism. And we already have a fully Marxist financial system, for example, per the recommendations of Karl Marx in the Communist Manifesto. We have a central bank with a full monopoly on the currency, which is one of the things that Marx wanted. We also have a heavy graduated income tax. That's another one of the, and we've had these things for more than 100 years. And these are both key planks in the communist program. So, and of course, now more recently, we have socialized medicine in everything but name. The only thing remaining is to shift over into what's called euphemistically a single payer system, which is fully socialized medicine. Basically, a health sector controlled by the state. That's what it means. Mm-hmm. And of course, the left, people like Mamdani, are hugely enthusiastic about that, and his supporters. So, there's quite a bit to worry about, that we are going to suffer perhaps a death of 1,000 socialist cuts if this continues for a couple more generations. But on the other hand, there are grounds for optimism that maybe we're going, as we have in the past, that we're going to, the tide is going to change, sentiment is going to shift, and we're going to move back towards being a more sensible, conservative, free market, pro-individual liberty type of society.
Well said. All right, let me take a quick break. Checked out Dr. Bonta's website, the New American magazine. Sorry about that. TheNewAmerican.com is the website where he is the senior editor there. TheNewAmerican.com. We'll be right back. Welcome back, and what an honor to have with us today Dr. Stephen Bonta. He's the executive senior editor of the American magazine, and that is the website, thenewamerican.com. And there at the New American magazine, you can read great articles. So check it out. Thenewamerican.com is the website. Dr. Bonta, one more question on some of this socialism stuff before I move over to AI quickly, and that is New York's financial base seems to be leaving town because of this. Does New York survive financially if they continue to go down this road?
Well, yes. I mean, some of the economic base is going to leave. I'm not sure the ultimate financial base is going to do that, because the ultimate financial base of New York City is the New York branch of the Federal Reserve, which is the most important of all the Federal Reserve branches. It's where, number one, it's where all of the Fed's gold reserves are lodged. And number two, it is the branch of the Fed that transacts all of the absolutely critical operations, open market operations, by which they buy and sell treasuries to certain financial institutions, all of which are in the New York City area. And this is a thing that they do to be able to manipulate the money supply. And this is one of the reasons, in my opinion, that New York City has been able to essentially defy economic gravity for so long. I mean, they didn't start imposing punitive taxes, regulations, and other socialist controls with the inauguration of Mamdani. They've been doing this for decades, and yet they continue to fly high. And the reason is that the center of the financial universe has been, since the creation of the Federal Reserve System, New York City. In the original, the New York Fed was given special power with its original head, a guy named Benjamin Strong, who, by the way, was the fellow that invented open market operations that are used by central banks all over the world now. Anyway, so as long as that state of affairs persists, as long as New York is the place where money is literally made, okay, in the inflationary, print money sense of the term, New York is going to be able to continue to get away with stuff that would simply bankrupt other cities. I mean, obviously, Detroit has gone from being the center of automotive manufacturing and so forth to being an urban wasteland today. But automotive manufacturing is a lot different than the power to create new money at will, which resides geographically in New York City.
Very interesting. I want to switch over to AI just for a moment. Just a quick question on AI before I get into it a little deeper. How do you think AI may impact socialism, or will it?
Well, certainly most of the versions of AI that we have right now are curated by woke type people. And so they're going to be giving, they're very useful for propagandistic purposes. And everyone's used AI, which I have and do on a daily basis, realizes this. So, and that has to do with, the woke culture that permeates Silicon Valley, where all this stuff is being created. However, there are other alternatives are already coming into view, because there is a demand. I suppose Grok is probably the closest right now. I think that, AI it may be that the power of AI may be a little bit overstated. There are very definite limits on what it can achieve, but it certainly is a power like the internet, the classical internet before it, and other versions of technology going all the way back to the printing press. It can be used for both good purposes and for ill. Certainly at our magazine, we've been able to exploit AI to create better graphics. It can be used to help in editing. We do not write articles with AI. We're never going to do that. There are certain things that AI will never be able to surpass human creativity in. But I think as an extension of human creativity, it has potentially very great utility. Also, though, it has great utility as a potential tool for propaganda and for molding public opinion. But a lot of that derives its potency from ignorance. I mean, people who are ignorant, who don't read about economics and politics and history and all these things are going to be ipso facto much more susceptible to propaganda in any form, be it an old-fashioned printed broadsheet or a modern day an AI generated video or something like that.
All right, so on the infrastructure side of AI, as it grows into just every part of our life, every industry, are we prepared? Can we handle this growth? I mean, we had one here in Oregon where they were looking at a data center, and there was a lot of reasons why it got put down. But one of the big reasons was we just didn't have the energy to run the stupid thing. you know?
Well, that's true, and there are two sides to that too. And the most interesting side is that our energy sector is severely underdeveloped, thanks to decades and decades of punitive regulations that have prevented us from, bringing more nuclear plants on stream, particularly since 3 Mile Island, way back in the 1970s in Pennsylvania. The nuclear industry has essentially been at a standstill, but also at the level of the extraction of raw resources, we are continually hamstring ourselves in terms of denying ourselves access to our own oil reserves and gas reserves and all this kind of thing. Frankly, I'm still marveling that the fracking industry was able to succeed at all, given the national temperament and susceptibility of so many Americans to all of these kind of, scare tactics. Oh, development is bad. It's just basically modern day Luddism. And, a lot of the arguments that I hear warning about, the excessive energy consumption, I think that it reminds me of the arguments one heard against nuclear power back in the day. Oh, well, nuclear plants are going to, take away jobs. They're going to destroy the environment. They're going to heat up the water, use too much water, all this type of thing. And so I tend to have more trust in the power of markets. And I do think that AI, that the markets allowed to work this out will figure it out. Now, that said, the thing that's worrisome about some of these data centers is the degree to which they're being, ramrodded through by government and being funded by government in many cases, against the will of taxpayers. I mean, if local people don't want a government-funded facility or even a private facility that's going to contaminate their water or put stress on their power grid and this sort of thing, if they don't want that, they should have a say in that. There's no question about that. And there's always been kind of this uneasy issue with things like this, because we've always seen fit in the kind of American economic tradition, going all the way back to Hamilton, to have a hefty involvement of government, be it local, state, or even federal, involved in the construction of infrastructure, highways, power plants, and so forth. And of course, these data centers, people are arguing, well, they're going to be a critical part of our national infrastructure. If we don't get with it, China's going to pass us up and so forth. So, there's some merit to those arguments. But I think on the whole that this is going to work itself out over the next 5 to 10 years. It'll be litigated in courts, and in some areas, the people are going to simply say, no, we don't want this. In other areas, they're going to say, whatever, we'll give it a try, and things will work out.
All right, one other question before I run out of time. Do you think that one of the greatest risks of AI is the biases that it projects?
Well, this is true, but this isn't just true of AI. It's also true of other aspects of the internet, certainly. The deliberate curating of news feeds and things like this. This has been going on since the inception of the internet, and certainly with much more vigor in the last 10 or 15 years or so. So, yeah, censorship is an issue. And, for a while, it was just, tear your hair out, frustrating.
Right.
In the last decade and during COVID and everything else, where they were literally and brazenly censoring websites before AI ever came along. And so obviously that same impulse, the same people that want to do that, have only aged a few years. Yeah. They haven't changed their views. They're going to try to use AI to accomplish what they couldn't ultimately do in the classic internet, now that the likes of Facebook and obviously X and even YouTube, although YouTube still does an awful lot of censorship, but most of the social media have kind of backed off on this under political pressure. And I suspect that the same will happen ultimately with AI. But that said, of course, like any new technology, it's a two-edged sword, and it already is being deployed for malign purposes. But the same can be said of every new technology that's come along. Yeah. And generally the good has outweighed the bad.
Well, Dr. Bonta, you're fascinating. Thank you for your time. Hopefully we can stay connected. Let me say to our viewers and listeners, he is the executive senior editor at the New American Magazine, and that is the place to go. The website is thenewamerican.com. There's a picture of that landing page there on the screen. Thank you, Dr. Bonta. Let's stay connected. You're fascinating.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
You too.